Hey everyone! If you're a fan of the show, please head over to mikeyop.com and click the subscribe button. It's the best way to support us, and it's free. That's mikeyOPP.com. Thanks! Hi, I'm Mike Oppenheim, and you are listening to Coffin Talk, Interviews with the Living, a weekly podcast that explores how our views on death affect the way we live our life. This week coming to us is Charlotte Benson, a Jyotish Devi, which is another way of saying for most of us Westerners, astrologer. And Charlotte Benson has been practicing astrology for since 1972, and it's currently 2021, so there's some fast math for me, almost 50 years. And she's a charter member and 5-term president of the Arizona Society of Astrologers, one of the largest and oldest astrological organizations of its kind in the West. And she's also an experienced public speaker, guest media commentator on astrology, and presenter at international astrology conferences. Trust me when I tell you, folks, if you like astrology, you are about to listen to a big wig in the astrology community. I am so lucky to have Charlotte Benson with us. So, Charlotte, how's it going today?
It's going just super groovy. Thank you for asking, Mike.
Awesome. And we're personal friends, but you're also my astrologer, and I've been seeing you for many years. So I am dying to hear you answer all these questions, because normally I see you and I ask a ton of questions about me, but now it's going to be all about you. So my first series of questions, I ask every guest this, is if you don't mind, for our audience to kind of picture who they're talking to. How old are you? Where did you grow up? And what generation do you belong to, if any?
Oh, well, those are pretty simple questions. I'm 70, amazingly enough. I grew up in the Puget Sound area of Washington State, the center of all grooviness up there. Yes, and, if I'm 70, that means I'm a baby boomer. Yeah, for sure.
And since you went ahead and used the word groovy, which enters us into cliche stereotypeville, I'm going to let you field a question I'm sure you get asked all the time, which is, astrology? Come on. I mean, we live in a culture where astrology has so many wide interpretations. So I'd love it if you could just kind of elucidate our audience on what astrology means to you and what exactly you practice.
Oh, yes. Well, thank you for giving me the option to clearly state that authentic astrology is very different than the type of commercial astrology that I assume that most of your listeners have been exposed to. I am an Aries, I am a Taurus, I am a Gemini, sort of a thing. We don't even look at that in authentic astrology. The type of astrology that I specialize in is called Vedic astrology, the astrology that comes from the original teachings of the Vedas, the major scriptures of the South Asian continent. And this type of astrology actually considers the placement of all of the planets, not just your sun sign, which I'm sure everybody knows, but the placement of all the planets in front of the constellations. We consider the constellations as being the determinants of any given personality trait, or any given life experience for the person, as opposed to just with all due respect to Western astrology, the cliches of being identified as your sun sign. So I don't know if this is too obscure, but authentic astrology has been used legitimately for thousands of years. It's been just sadly degraded in the last 150 years or so, but there is a resurgence in the use of authentic astrology for self-knowledge or for planning and timing. So I'm sure it's a lot different than what people have been exposed to in the world of pop astrology.
Yeah, and something I tell people when I'm speaking about, especially my experiences with you specifically, the reason I say that you're wise and I actually appreciate the help you give me is that you don't say things like, you're going to die in a car accident, this bad thing's going to happen to you. You look at probability and percentages and likelihood, and you explain them to me, and you don't tell me exactly what's going to happen. What I would like to hear from you, because I've actually never asked you this, and this is super fun for me, is what's your best, I'm at a dinner party story that can kind of wow people about astrology? And it doesn't have to be from yourself and your own client.
Well, that's a great. That is also a great question. Well, I will admit to you that I avoid talking about the subject the fact that I'm an astrologer. That just brings up too many questions. I've met with all sorts as clients. I've met with a lot of different people.
Well, I think what I'm trying to push you for is like a story that would indicate that astrology is more than just guessing and luck.
Oh, yes. Well, I've had plenty of those kind of instances. One good soundbite here is I remember somebody saying, "You saved my 401k." Now, that was a few years ago. But again, it's kind of along the lines of looking at astrology. If a person knows what they're doing, it's really pretty mechanical. By that I mean that planets move into a certain position, and they imply a condition. It's pretty straightforward. But an example, a relatively recent example I could cite would be, I got an actual phone call from a man. He was a psychiatrist at a big metropolitan hospital, and he said, somebody referred you to me, but I want to see what you can. I want to see what you say. So, thanks to computers, I quickly whipped out his chart, and I said, well, you have an eating disorder. You were alienated from a mother who did not support you, and you have a very, very strange relationship. So he confirmed all of that immediately, but that's the Vedic astrology can do that sort of thing. I don't like to just show off like that, but it can. These particular planetary patterns can be seen, and to the practical use of the client.
Yeah, wow. Okay, that's a great example, and I think that kind of brings us to like the point that I wanted to get to, which is this is a podcast that explores mortality and our opinions on death and morality. So it's like a kind of triple shot. And so with the reason I wanted to have an astrologer on is that I think people believe that astrology is predictive and that it means that there's a predestined future. And so before you give me your opinion on death and dying and all of that, I'd like to know what Jyotish astrology, the form that you practice, Vedic astrology, what does it have to say about predetermination versus free will?
Well, thank you. That is the relevant question. And so the way I describe it in a very simple way is that the planets, what astrology is based on the position of the planets at the exact time and date and place a person is born. The exact time of day is really important because it really helps define and refine what goes on during any 24-hour period for a person. So the planets are in certain places at certain times of day, obviously, but I consider them to be default settings. So if a person without much consciousness of what they're doing, of course they're going to act out their default settings. But default settings can be changed through application and experience and intelligence and good choices and certain things like that. So certain people are fated to live out what the planets want them to do in a certain way. But again, human consciousness overrides the influence of the planets. Now, I'm saying that in a public venue here, and that's rather heretical for a professional astrologer to say something like that. But your individual human conscious overrides the influence of the planets. So, but I've also considered, just in the decades that I've been looking at people's charts, that I think there's about 30% fate or destiny or pre-imprint, and about 70% free will.
Wow, so that's cool because that actually personally pleases me just in a I'd like to wake up every day and know that some things are already taken care of and planned. Like mom's prepared my lunch, I'm going to school, but what's going to happen at school and what the lunch is kind of like a little less controlled, and that, or I can trade my lunch. Maybe that's a better metaphor. So cool. I really like that. That was very helpful. And I'd like to say your heresy is private and between us, but I hope this podcast blows up and people listen to it. And it's so I'll make sure to cover for you if that happens. So the $1 million question, the reason I'm having you on the show is I ask every single guest, what do you think happens when you die? So this is directed to you, Charlotte Benson. It's not about your profession. If the two overlap, that's fine. It's your answer. But what do you think happens when you die?
Well, I think you simply transfer energy to some intermediate location, or I think your some level of your own consciousness goes on. Probably most of the people that you interview would say something like that. I firmly believe in reincarnation, in case that's associated with your question. I think it's just like you dropping a suit of clothes and on to the next big thing. And where you end up in that next level of, after you drop your body, where you end up, I think, is a result, a cumulative result of what you've done in this lifetime. I don't really believe in heaven and hell. I think that heaven and hell are experienced in this life, but I believe that there's essentially a benign place where you go to rest up, get your bearings, and either rest on your accumulated merit or get some kind of punishment is not the right idea, but so there is a law of cause and effect, and I think one would get their just desserts, but that also only lasts for a certain period of time. I think you can tell that I'm emphatic about this point. Even if one were to go straight to, let's call it heaven for whatever reason, one can only stay there a certain length of time because you actually run out of your merit badge points for your good works. And
yeah, so actually it's funny because China actually is doing this in real life. They're coming up with social credit, and if you're a bad citizen, you lose social credit, and if you're a good citizen, you gain it. And it actually literally could be the difference between being admitted to like a better hospital or not. So if you're a bad citizen, you lose social credit, ergo your life here is literally worse. So I'm kind of seeing this model with you, like, hey, I was Mother Teresa. I helped the poor and the dying and the blah, blah, blah. I'm in heaven. And then all of a sudden they're like, excuse me, Mother Teresa, it's been 50 years. And I'm sorry, you did help a lot of people, but not enough to stay longer than this. Is that kind of?
Yes, yes. That makes sense to me. We see that kind of model here on this planet where, you take good care of your health and you'll be healthy. If not, you won't be. Or, obviously it's a very elementary idea, but I also wanted to say that there's, I'm, as a Vedic astrologer, I'm informed by the ancient classics of let's call it Indian or Hindu or Vedic literature. And, there's plenty of instances in those ancient shastras, in those ancient source material about what happens after death, and that made what I read in those sort of documents makes much more sense to me than what I was brought up on, heaven and hell. I really resented that. When I was a kid, I was so worried about going straight to hell. Not because I've done anything wrong, but that was highly emphasized, wasn't it? I'm getting over that now, but I do, yes. But in any case, in the ancient shastras, there are stories of, the ancient heroes of the Mahabharata, where especially one character, one being or entity, Yudhishthira, he was a flawless person, but he had to go to hell just for a minute because he'd thought something, I don't know, because he'd hedged on something, but I think there's plenty of material there in those ancient sources for food for thought, for sure.
Yeah, and so you said a lot of interesting things, and I took a little notes, so I'm going to kind of ask you sub questions from your overall answer, and I think they'll really help flesh out things that our listeners want to hear. So my first question is, you said kind of like taking off clothes and putting on new clothes. That metaphor doesn't quite work for me, only because is Charlotte Benson, the person I'm talking to, the clothes, then what is the real person, quote unquote? Because that means Charlotte Benson wouldn't go to heaven, right? Like this thing underneath Charlotte Benson would go. Is that correct?
That is correct. So in the Vedic literature, that internal entity that persists forever is the Atman. I guess you could sort of correlate that to soul, although I'm not sure about these terms really either. Quite frankly, is soul the same as spirit? But whatever whatever invisible entity, the etheric body, or the part that does not decay, that remains forever somewhere.
And that thing that remains forever, does it have like a personality that is in each of its lives that is similar? Like that's something I've always been trying to figure out with people who believe what you believe.
Well, I think that personality might not be the exact word. It's more like consciousness. That a person is, the consciousness is what persists. I realize that's also a broad term, but what is that? Awareness of something, or level of consciousness. But then we say that if I start to use a term like level of consciousness, that sounds pretentious to me. But then that also implies some kind of judgment that people are, some people are low consciousness. I mean, how do we even define that? But carving back around to your question, it's the consciousness, or let's say Atman, Atman, that persist in some form. I think that the personality, I mean, you use that term specifically, the personality changes through every, let's say, incarnation. Because the personality is just basically interaction with the outside world, or the outside plane, that in the next incarnation. So that's something a little more superficial, I think.
No, that's great. And so the Atman, I'm going to refer to it as the Atman for the rest of the interview because it's easier for me and it makes sense. I don't want to call it a soul because you've been specific and I like that. So the Atman, does the Atman care? Like, does the Atman care if Charlotte Benson gets in her car tonight, drinks 5 drinks and runs over a school, but like a group of school kids? I'm trying to pick the most far-fetched example.
Well, yes, I mean, it is to be hoped. Yes. The Atman. Well, if now the instance that you just described would be that. Now that starts to get involved with someone else's, dare I say it, karma, fate, destiny. So if I run over someone, there's a definite destined link between my Atman and that other person's Atman. That could be there could be a preordained contract. For this to happen, as unhappy as it sounds. So does the Atman care? Well, that's an interesting question. I'm sure it does. But if planet Earth is a school for experience and challenging opportunities bring growth and all those sorts of quaint ideas. Quaint but true ideas, rather. I don't know if the Atman cares, but that specific instance there's a lot of moving pieces associated with that. Your example.
I think because what I'm trying to figure out is so I believe that I've always felt, and I currently believe that there's definitely a me and a me, and one me observes the other me. And I can never figure out if the higher me, the higher self, what I think might be my Atman, is actually able to grab the steering wheel of Mike Oppenheim and say, no, 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 we're going this way. Or if it just sits there paralyzed, not with fear and not with hope or not with any emotion, but just literally paralyzed. So that's kind of what I'm trying to ask is not only is it possible for the Atman to care, which is an emotion, but is it also possible for the Atman to do?
Good Lord, you ask these probing questions, dear. I don't think the Atman is paralyzed. I think that there is again that aspect of detached observation in terms of your again you're making conscious choices. You're making conscious choices. Now, who directs the conscious choice to do good or ill? I think part of that is associated with habits. Quite frankly, I think that you can sort of train yourself to take the higher road or something along those lines. I'm not sure I'm even addressing your question.
You are, and I'm actually ready to completely jump to a different topic because to me these are all related, and I trust my audience. I think they're going to see where I'm going with all this. I am interested in exploring this like actual scientific side of the Vedic astrology, and so my next question is directly related to that, which is you talked about preordained like meetings. So like in the fake example of the car accident, it was preordained between two Atmans that this would occur. So have you ever looked at a chart and just wanted to cry? Like you're just like, oh my God, your preordained life is terrible by anyone's standards. Like, is that possible, and has that happened?
Well, I'm sure it's possible, but no, I have not had that kind of experience. And if I had, I would not. I would not articulate that to my client, for heaven's sakes. That is, I mean, I have to go by the idea of what is helpful. What is helpful? And again, as I previously mentioned, there's things can be changed, and that is the main reason one of the main reasons for looking at Jyotish or Vedic astrology is to, as you cited in your own example of that health-related issue, is to, as they say, to avert the danger which has not yet come. So yes, charts. That's we could also say charts are equivalent to horoscopes. There are plenty of really challenging horoscopes, for sure. But that is what the person signed up for in this lifetime. As what Plato says in the Timaeus, that a soul chooses the exact time to be born, the exact time, place, and to which parents to be born, and then crosses the river Lethe, the river of forgetfulness, and shows up to have the adventures that they signed up to have. Some of these adventures are questionable. I mean, you could say, what were you thinking by having your 8th house lord in the 1st house, or something like that. But it's perfect for that person, even if it's very complex.
Well, I can relate it personally. You've met my first wife, you've met my son, and you know what happened with my first wife and my son, and you know my second and last ever wife, my current wife, my only person who's our producer of the show, and she's on the phone. And so you saw me in phases of my life. You saw me before my first marriage, you saw me during it, you saw me after it, and each of these times you gave me advice that I did and did not follow and consider correctly or incorrectly. And so that's why I'm a big fan of yours, and I'm a big fan of explaining this to people. And actually, I'm going to bring it down a level from like big major events I just spoke about to like small ones. You also tell me things like, hey, November 11th, watch your temper. And then I like remember on November 11th, because I'll put these little notes. And sure enough, like at some point that day, I'm about to like explode and murder this person ahead of me in line. And instead, I just go, Charlotte told me to watch my temper. It might be wise to succumb to her advice instead of giving into my ego. Because I know I'm right. I know this person ahead of me has 15 items and this is a 10-item list. But they also could be carrying a gun.
That is correct. Well, that is the better part of wisdom, young man. To, as I would also so delicately say to you, one of those. I think you're describing a Mars. When Mars is prominent in your chart, you just put up and shut up. That's my delicate advice. But yes, astrology is really quite remarkable because it can address the questions of eons and kalpas. These time periods that are, millions and billions of years long. And then it could also be useful in terms of saying, what's going to happen this afternoon.
It's great. And I think what I'm trying to build up to, I told you I had a bunch of sub-questions that would lead to one cohesive, is the following, which is morality as stated by most people in America. I'm going to stick to the country we both live in. It's like pretty black and white. It's pretty Judeo-Christian. thou shalt not this, thou shalt not that. We run into gray areas with like a few things, but for the most part, it's very cut and dry. So I'm curious with you and your opinion of the Atman and birth and death and cycles of life and karma. Does it really matter? Like, is morality actually a thing, or is it a perception of suffering related to morality?
Well, let your conscience be your guide, according to the great philosopher Jiminy Cricket. So I think that I don't know if this is relevant. You'll tell me that choices boil down to two different impulses: love or fear. Isn't that right? Well, that's how at this stage of my life, I have to distill things so that I can understand them, and it's not exactly black or white, but it's. I think people can. If it's put in those kinds of terms, fear. A lot of this bad behavior we see recently is based on fear, isn't it? People want their stuff. There's not enough to go around, and to heck with everybody else. I'm paraphrasing, of course, and I think that's fear-based. And but then the other option is love, and I don't mean that in a corny way, but having faith in a compassionate universe that yes, there's plenty to go around, and be a decent person, and there's a better way here, isn't there? There must be a better way.
Wow. Yeah. That's very profound. It's weird. I've never in my life thought about fear as the opposite of love. I've thought of fear as its own thing, but that's a really profound concept for me. I'm going to have to think about that for way longer than I have time on this podcast. But I do like to leave my guests with a chance to have the floor. So we are up to the end of the interview. You've said so many profound and wise things. You've also, I think, really done a really succinct job of breaking down Vedic astrologies for people who are interested. So Charlotte Benson, originally from the Puget Sound region, but currently in Phoenix, Arizona, what would you like our audience to know?
Oh, gosh. Well, I think that, again, if we can just bring it back to those two very simple concepts of fear or love, those concepts can help. I believe that they can help people make choices on a daily basis, which will improve their life. Choosing to believe in a compassionate universe, for instance, as opposed to believing it's a dog-eat-dog world and there's not enough to go around and that sort of thing. I think that people have much more control over their destiny based on the small decisions they make every day. And yes, it is true that certain people have. The people have proclivities in one way or the other based on their planetary positions. It's true, but still, I think that developing. Now here's a corny bit again, but I'm an old lady. You have to go with the corny. Developing one's own personal spiritual practice, whatever that looks like. Spiritual practice helps people lead healthier, happier lives. And probably orients a person more toward faith and love than fear.
Wow. Well, Charlotte Benson, thank you so much for helping us put another nail in the coffin. This has been a wonderful, wonderful opportunity for me. I was so excited to interview you. And thank you again. I know you're actually extremely busy, so thank you so much for taking time out of your schedule for us here at Coffin Talk, Interviews with the Living. Once again, to my listeners, my name is Mike Oppenheim, and we would love it if you could subscribe to the show, share it with a friend, and give us a positive rating on Apple. And maybe you can develop your own spiritual practice. That would be excellent as well. So thank you again, Charlotte, and to everyone else, I will see you soon.